Captain Elara Thorne stared at the endless stretch of stars beyond the viewport of the Vanguard. The ship had been in deep space for months now, searching for signs of life, unexplored galaxies, and unknown civilizations. The crew, a mix of veterans and hopeful explorers, had long since adjusted to the isolation. They lived for the thrill of discovery. But today, something was different. The sensors had picked up an anomaly, a faint signal originating from a distant star system on the edge of the Milky Way, far beyond any known territory. It was nothing like anything they'd encountered before. The signal was consistent, almost deliberate, as though someone, or something, was trying to reach them. The frequency was unusual, too, resembling an ancient communication pattern used by long-lost civilizations. Elara, Commander Jalen Arcady's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're going to want to see this." She turned toward him, her interest piqued. Jalen, a sharp and pragmatic officer, had a way of simplifying the complex, making him one of her most trusted advisors. He stood by the communications console, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface, pulling up data streams that flickered in bright, neon hues. "Have a look at this," he said, his voice unusually tense. Elara moved closer. The signal was clearer now, and as she examined it, she could feel a chill creeping down her spine. There was a series of harmonic patterns buried deep in the signal, too organized, too methodical to be random. It was almost as if someone had deliberately encoded a message. But why send it to a ship that was light years away? "We need to go there," she said, a sense of urgency overtaking her. The crew had spent too long in the void, chasing fleeting signals and empty hope. This was different. The crew members were gathered in the briefing room within the hour. The holographic map of the distant galaxy flickered before them, showing a small star system tucked away in an uncharted corner. A planet in the third orbit was marked as the source of the signal. It looked like any other barren world at first glance, lifeless, with no trace of intelligent life on its surface. "Captain," Jalen began, his voice thoughtful, "we've seen uninhabited planets before. Why is this one different?" Elara paused. She wasn't sure, but something about the way the signal had been encoded, how it resonated in her mind, felt intentional. Like someone, or something, was trying to tell them something. The Vanguard's mission was to explore the unknown, to bring back stories that would shape humanity's future. But what if this story was one that would change everything? "We're going in," Elara declared. "Prepare for descent to the planet's surface. We're going to find out who sent that signal, and why." As the crew prepared for the journey, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just an exploration mission. There was something waiting for them on that planet, something ancient, something forgotten. And the message they had just received was a warning. Or perhaps, an invitation. The journey through the galaxy took a matter of days, but every passing minute felt stretched, as though the ship was being pulled by an unseen force. The Vanguard's engines hummed, steady and powerful, but there was a deep, unsettling silence within the ship. The closer they got to the planet, the more aware they became of the strange, almost magnetic pull of the signal. When they finally broke through the planet's atmosphere, the sight that greeted them was not what they expected. The planet was not barren at all. It was eerily beautiful, with sprawling cities hidden beneath a veil of glowing mist, structures that looked like they were both organic and mechanical, intertwined in a way that defied conventional understanding. The surface was alive. Thick, green vines intertwined with buildings, soft blue lights flickering from cracks in the stone, and odd, symmetrical formations that seemed to pulse with energy. It was as though a civilization had once flourished here, only to vanish in an instant. Elara's heart quickened. "This is impossible," she murmured. The colony, whatever it was, had seemingly disappeared overnight. "What the hell happened here?" Jalen asked, his voice low as he scanned the readings from the planet's surface. "We're about to find out," Elara replied, her voice steady, though inside, uncertainty gnawed at her. It was then that she saw it. A faint, almost invisible trail of light, streaking from the city ruins and leading into a distant cavern. The signal had originated here. Whatever message they had been sent had started with this place. And now, the real journey was about to begin. They would follow the signal, trace its origin, and uncover the secrets hidden beneath the surface of this dead world. But as they prepared to land and set foot on the soil of this forgotten planet, Elara couldn't help but wonder if some truths were meant to remain hidden. And if the past, whatever it was, had learned how to manipulate the future. The crew began to suit up for their descent. They had no idea just how dangerous this journey would be. The unknown awaited them, and it was watching. The Vanguard's landing was smooth, though a sense of foreboding clung to the crew like a cold fog. As Elara Thorne stepped out onto the strange, moss-covered surface of the planet, her boots sunk into the soft, bioluminescent soil. The air was thick with an odd, sweet smell, almost metallic, and the sky above was tinged with shades of purple and green, casting a surreal glow over the landscape. "Stay close," Elara instructed as the rest of the crew filed out behind her, their movements cautious. The colony's ruins lay in the distance, shrouded in the thick mist, which seemed to pulse and shift in an unnatural way, as though the air itself was alive. "We have no idea what we're walking into," Jalen muttered under his breath, his hand hovering near the weapon strapped to his waist. "This place doesn't feel right." Elara nodded but didn't respond. Her instincts were screaming that something was watching them, something that wasn't entirely tangible. She had seen countless planets in her time, each one with its own unique ecosystem and history. But this felt different, as though the planet itself had a secret, and it was only waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The team made their way toward the central structure, a towering, spiraling monument of strange stone and metallic alloys, clearly built by an intelligence far beyond anything humanity had encountered. The buildings surrounding the structure seemed to be part of the same organism, growing in sync with the environment, like vines that had been molded into purpose. No human hands had built this place, at least, not in the traditional sense. Elara's heart quickened as they approached the monument. It was too symmetrical, too perfect, as though it had been carved from a dream. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for them, that the moment they set foot in the shadow of the structure, something would change. "Captain," Jalen called out, his voice tense. "There's something here." Elara turned to see what he meant. He had found a narrow entrance into the side of the structure, hidden beneath a cascade of glowing vines. It was barely wide enough to fit a person, but the light that seeped through the cracks was unmistakable. It was coming from inside. "Is it safe?" Elara asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," Jalen replied simply, "but we don't have a choice." She nodded, signaling to the rest of the crew. "Prepare yourselves. This could be more than we bargained for." They moved inside. The passage was narrow, the air heavy with a sense of antiquity and power. The walls inside were smooth, almost glass-like, with faint patterns running across them. Patterns that seemed to change and shift as they moved, like a living tapestry. It was mesmerizing, yet unnerving. They reached the central chamber after what seemed like an eternity, though the passage was only a few hundred meters long. The chamber was vast, far larger than the entrance had suggested. Towering pillars, covered in the same shifting patterns, stretched up into the darkness above. The floor was smooth and polished, yet etched with strange symbols, as though the entire room had been designed to convey some sort of information. At the far end of the chamber, a massive console sat in the center, a mixture of organic and technological components. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, and though it seemed ancient, it was unmistakably functional. As Elara approached, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness, as though her mind were being drawn toward the console, compelled to interact with it. Something about it felt alive. "Is this the source of the signal?" Jalen asked, his voice strained as he looked around the room. "I think so," Elara replied, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out toward the console, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the surface. As soon as she made contact, the room seemed to come alive. The patterns on the walls flashed brighter, and the air crackled with energy. A hum filled the space, not from the console itself, but from deep within the very structure of the room, as if it were awakening after a long, dormant sleep. The symbols on the walls began to shift and move faster, as though trying to tell them something. Elara's eyes widened. The patterns weren't just random, they were a language. And now, she could almost hear them, like whispers in her mind. A sudden jolt ran through the room, and a voice filled Elara's thoughts. It was not a sound, not a vibration, more like a presence, a force pressing into her mind. Welcome. The voice was calm, yet carried with it an unimaginable weight, as though the speaker had existed for eons. It was neither male nor female, nor even of any recognizable species. It was something else entirely, something vast. You are here, at last. You have followed the signal. You are too late. The voice was alien, and yet, somehow familiar, as though it had been there all along, waiting for them to find it. The crew tensed, but Elara stood frozen, unable to look away from the glowing console. They've been waiting for you, the voice continued, its tone shifting, almost regretful. You do not understand what you have come to. You will. But first, you must see. Before Elara could speak, the room darkened, the air thickening around them. Images flashed before her eyes. Visions of the past, of a thriving civilization, of people who once lived here. They were humanoid, but not quite like humans, taller, their bodies slender, their eyes large and luminous. They moved with grace, their city alive with energy, its spires reaching toward the stars. But then the visions changed. The images grew darker, more chaotic. She saw the inhabitants of the colony, their faces twisted in horror as they were drawn into the very core of the structure. The console glowed brightly, as though feeding off their fear, and she could see them changing, being manipulated by an unseen force. They weren't just being controlled, they were being experimented on. Their minds were unraveling, each one slipping into madness as they unknowingly participated in a horrific experiment orchestrated by an intelligence far beyond their understanding. The images stopped as abruptly as they had started. The chamber was silent once again, and the voice, now distant, spoke one last time. You are the next subjects. Elara's heart raced. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. This was no ordinary colony. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been taken, used as pawns in a twisted experiment by an intelligence that now watched them with cold, calculating eyes. The team stood motionless, each member processing the horrors they had just witnessed. They had entered this place seeking answers, but what they found was far worse than they could have imagined. Now, the question remained. Could they escape the same fate, or would they, too, become part of the cycle? The hum of the chamber was still, the air thick with the presence of the ancient intelligence that had now made itself known to them. Elara Thorne's breath came in shallow, quick bursts, and her heart pounded like a war drum in her chest. Her mind raced with the fragments of images she had witnessed, the visions of the colony's fall, the people transformed into mere puppets, controlled and twisted by a force that they could not understand. Captain, Jalen's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and urgent. We need to leave. Now. Elara's hand was still pressed to the console, her fingers trembling as she tried to absorb the enormity of what she had just learned. But her gaze flickered over to the rest of the crew. They were all pale, their expressions haunted by what they had seen in the vision. Visions that were not just of the past, but echoes of something that was still very much alive. The voice, its words still lingered in her mind like a phantom. You are the next subjects. We can't leave, Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to understand more. This is bigger than anything we've ever encountered. Jalen's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? You saw what happened to them. We don't know what that thing is, what it wants. We're not even sure it's... I know, she interrupted him, her voice firm. But we can't just walk away. If we do, we leave the next crew that stumbles upon this place to face the same fate. I'm not letting that happen. We have to stop it. He opened his mouth to protest but saw the unyielding determination in her eyes. He knew she was right, even if the thought terrified him. The consequences of leaving now could be far worse than staying. The crew could feel the weight of the decision pressing on them, the sense that the planet itself was waiting, watching, and willing to do whatever it took to draw them into its grasp. A sudden sound broke through the tension, a low growl reverberating from deep within the chamber. The floor beneath them seemed to shift, and the walls groaned, like a living organism awakening from a long slumber. The symbols on the walls began to twist once more, moving rapidly, as if trying to convey something urgently. "Get ready," Jalen shouted, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. His eyes darted to the crew, and they all instinctively fell into a defensive posture, knowing that whatever was happening, it was about to get much worse. A low hum filled the room, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, with a blinding flash, the entire chamber went dark. When the lights returned, the world had changed. Elara blinked, disoriented. She was no longer in the vast chamber beneath the surface. She stood on what appeared to be the edge of a city, one that was not the ruins of the colony they had come to explore, but a vibrant, living place. The buildings rose around her, shining in the same iridescent light that had filled the chamber. There were people here, but they were not human. They had the same elongated limbs, luminous eyes, and graceful forms that she had seen in the visions, though they appeared to be in some sort of stasis, frozen in time. "What in the hell?" Jalen breathed, looking around at the strange world that had materialized before them. He reached out to touch one of the buildings, his fingers grazing the surface. It was warm, almost alive. "It's not real," Elara murmured, taking a step forward. She could feel the pulse of the planet beneath her feet, a rhythm that resonated through her bones. "This is an illusion or a memory. It's showing us the past. The colony, what it was before." She paused, looking up at the sky, an endless stretch of swirling nebulae and strange constellations. Something about the sky felt like it was alive, too. It was as though the entire planet itself was projecting this false reality, a reflection of its lost civilization, designed to pull them deeper into its grasp. "We're not supposed to be here," Jalen muttered, clearly unnerved. "This place, it's playing with us." Elara didn't respond. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle that were rapidly falling into place. The colony's inhabitants had been manipulated into participating in an experiment, a grand, insidious test that bent time and perception. But what if the experiment hadn't ended with them? What if the intelligence, whatever it was still operating, still searching for new subjects to carry out its will? They had come here looking for answers, but the answers were leading them into something much darker. The ground trembled beneath them. A massive shadow rose from the center of the city, towering above the structures. The sky above twisted, rippling like liquid, and from it emerged a figure, larger than anything they had seen before. Its form was indistinct at first, a blurry mass of shifting tendrils and light. But as it solidified, the crew saw it. A being unlike anything human, a fusion of organic and synthetic matter, its shape ever shifting. Elara felt her breath catch in her throat. The being's eyes, if they could be called eyes, were like deep pools of darkness, filled with an unfathomable depth. And in that moment, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a memory or illusion. This was the intelligence, the ancient force that had once ruled over this colony. It had manipulated their minds, guided their every action, pushed them to their destruction. And now it was reaching out to them, just as it had with the previous inhabitants. The voice that had spoken to her earlier filled her mind again, only this time it was stronger, more forceful. "You are not of the past, but you will become part of it." Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped back, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The creature, or entity, spoke again, its voice a deep, resonating hum that vibrated through her skull. "You are here to complete the cycle." The air crackled with energy as the entity began to extend its tendrils toward them, twisting through the air with unnatural speed. The crew backed away, but the atmosphere was thick, suffocating, like the entire planet had turned against them. Every movement felt slow, as if the world itself was pushing them toward the inevitable. Elara's mind raced. They couldn't let this happen. If they didn't stop it now, the cycle would repeat itself, and they would be just like the others, lost, controlled, manipulated by an intelligence that didn't care for life or death. It only cared about the experiment, the process. "We need to fight back," she said, voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "Whatever it takes." But even as she spoke, she realized that the true battle wouldn't be won with weapons or force. The real enemy was the planet itself, the intelligence that had ensnared every soul that had come here before. And the question now was, how do you break free from something that controls not just your body, but your very mind? The crew stood together, but Elara knew this was no ordinary fight. They were up against something far older, far more powerful than they had ever imagined. And if they didn't find a way to break the cycle, they would never leave this place alive. They were already part of the experiment. The only question was whether they could find a way to escape before it was too late. Elara stood frozen, her eyes locked on the monstrous entity before her. The tendrils of energy, glowing with a sickly light, swayed through the air like serpents. Each movement of the creature seemed to warp reality itself, distorting the world around her. The crew was scrambling behind her, weapons drawn, but Elara knew in her gut that no weapon would stop what they were facing. This was not a creature to be fought with force. This was an intelligence, an ancient and powerful force that had played with the very fabric of existence for eons. The entity's tendrils reached toward her, its shape swirling and shifting in ways that defied logic. Each tendril seemed to pulse with an unnatural, almost magnetic force, like it was pulling at the very essence of her being. "Captain!" Jalen's voice snapped her back to reality. His hand was gripping her arm, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to move. This thing. It's not what we think. It's controlling us." Elara's mind raced, struggling to process the implications of Jalen's words. He was right. The feeling was unmistakable. This thing wasn't just watching them. It was inside their heads, its presence worming into their thoughts, twisting and distorting their perceptions. She could feel it, a weight pressing down on her, trying to invade her mind, to bend her to its will. "You are part of the cycle now." The voice echoed again, louder this time, and Elara's knees nearly buckled as the words washed over her. It was too much, too invasive, too powerful. But she fought back, focusing on her breathing, trying to hold onto herself as the entity's influence spread through her consciousness. The creature was using the chamber to manifest its power. It was pulling their minds into its grasp, making them relive the horrors of the past. The city, the colony, the twisted experiments. It was all a ruse to bring them into this moment, to make them participants in its grand design. Elara, Jalen's voice was strained, his hand tightening around her arm. "We need to break out of this, now." She snapped her head toward him. He was right. The longer they stayed in this reality, the more they would be trapped by it. The entity wasn't just manipulating their bodies. It was manipulating their very perceptions of time and space. It wanted them to be part of the cycle, to suffer as the others had suffered. It was feeding on their fear, their uncertainty. "Move," Elara shouted, and the crew scrambled to follow her orders. She turned and sprinted toward the edge of the city, her boots pounding on the soft ground. The glowing tendrils of the entity reached after them, stretching with impossible speed, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. The more they gave in to fear, the more power it had over them. The vision, the city, the voices, they were all illusions meant to trap them. "Elara, we need to think our way out of this," Jalen called ahead, his voice desperate. "I know," she shot back, her heart racing. "We're not dealing with a creature, Jalen. We're dealing with an intelligence. An ancient one that's been experimenting on entire populations for millennia." The ground trembled beneath them again. The city began to distort, bending and twisting, as if it were collapsing in on itself. The glowing mist that had surrounded them seemed to expand, enveloping the entire horizon. They were running blind, through a reality that shifted with every step, every thought. And then, with a sickening lurch, the world fractured. Elara blinked, disoriented. The air around them had gone cold, and the glowing mist was gone. They were no longer in the city. They were standing in what looked like a vast, underground cavern, its walls glistening with strange minerals that reflected the faint light from the console they had discovered earlier. But now, the console was gone. The chamber was empty. The oppressive presence of the entity was gone as well. The crew was panting, disheveled from the sprint, their faces pale with exhaustion. No one spoke for a long moment. "What just happened?" Jalen asked, his voice low. "Where are we?" Elara was silent, her mind still reeling from what they had just experienced. The world had shifted again. Had it been a trick? Or had they truly escaped the clutches of the entity? "This isn't over," she said quietly, shaking her head. "It wanted us to run. It wants us to think we can escape. But we're still part of its game." One of the crew members, Lieutenant Reyes, stepped forward. His face was grim, his eyes haunted. "Captain, I saw something. Back in the city, before we left. There was a symbol, glowing on one of the buildings. It was the same as the one from the visions." Elara's pulse quickened. The symbol, she remembered it now. It had appeared briefly, flickering in her mind like a beacon, just before the entity had surrounded them. She hadn't been able to make sense of it then, but now, her intuition screamed at her to pay attention. "What was the symbol?" she asked. Reyes swallowed hard. "It looked like an eye, but not a human one. It was more like a sphere with intricate patterns running through it, like a map, or..." "A map?" Elara repeated, suddenly intrigued. "Where did it lead?" "I don't know," Reyes admitted. "But it was like the map of a place, an archive, or something buried deep beneath the surface. It seemed like it was pointing toward something." Elara's mind raced. A map. The entity had been trying to show them something. A place, a repository, perhaps. Something important. Something they needed to understand if they were to break free of its hold. "All right," Elara said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her mind. "We're going to find this place. Whatever it is, it's our key to stopping this. We need to destroy whatever the entity is using to manipulate the colony, and us." The crew nodded, though their faces were grim. They all knew that what lay ahead was likely more dangerous than anything they had already encountered. But Elara was resolute. She wasn't about to let the entity win. If they didn't find this place, this source of power, they would be trapped here forever, just like the inhabitants of the colony before them. Without another word, Elara turned, leading the crew through the cavern. The air was heavy with the unspoken tension that hung between them. They knew they were walking into the heart of the unknown, but they had no choice. The cycle had to end, and they were going to be the ones to end it. As they descended deeper into the cavern, the air grew colder, the walls tighter. The further they went, the more they could feel the weight of the intelligence pressing down on them, the sensation of being watched, of being pulled toward something. Whatever was waiting at the end of this journey, Elara knew one thing for certain. They were running out of time. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, its winding path leading them deeper into the bowels of the planet. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls closed in around them, as though the very rock was alive, shifting and contorting with every footfall. The faint glow from their suits illuminated the path ahead, casting eerie shadows against the rough-hewn stone. "We've been walking for hours," Jalen muttered, his voice tinged with exhaustion. His hand rested on his weapon, as though instinctively preparing for something he couldn't yet see. "How much farther?" Elara paused for a moment, scanning the path ahead. There was something in the air, something intangible that gnawed at her nerves. It was as if the planet itself was trying to pull them back, trying to keep them from reaching whatever lay ahead. "We're close," Elara said, though she wasn't entirely certain. Her intuition told her they were nearing something. Something important, but the suffocating silence was unnerving. "We have to keep moving." Lieutenant Reyes, who had been leading their small group, looked back at her, his face pale under the dim light. "What exactly are we looking for, Captain? A structure? An artifact? A weapon? I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet. "But the map, whatever it is, the symbol we saw before, it's leading us somewhere. We'll know it when we find it." As they continued their trek deeper into the cavern, the air grew heavier, thicker. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on them, their every movement scrutinized by something unseen. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have, every breath more labored, as though the very space was pushing back against them. Then, without warning, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, far larger than anything they had yet encountered. The ceiling seemed to stretch up into infinity, lost in darkness, while the floor beneath their feet was smooth and unnaturally level, almost as if it had been carved by an intelligence far beyond human understanding. The faint glow from their suits cast long shadows on the walls, but it was the central feature of the chamber that caught Elara's attention. A massive stone pedestal at the center of the room, covered in the same intricate symbols that had appeared on the walls of the city above. Atop the pedestal sat a glowing sphere, its surface smooth and pulsing with an internal light. The sphere emitted a soft hum, a vibration that resonated deep within Elara's chest. "Is this it?" Jalen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding. This was what the map had led them to, the source of it all. The thing that had been controlling the minds of the colony's inhabitants. The entity had created this, and now it was drawing them in, like moths to a flame. But something in the air had shifted. The sensation of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, had grown more intense. The walls seemed to close in around them, and Elara could feel a faint pressure on her mind, as though her thoughts were being tugged at by an invisible hand. "The entity knows we're here," she said quietly. "It's already trying to pull us in." The crew tensed, their hands twitching toward their weapons. But Elara held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "No," she said, her voice firm. "We don't fight it. Not yet." Jalen and Reyes exchanged uneasy glances, but they trusted her judgment. They had no other choice. Elara moved closer to the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the glowing sphere. It was mesmerizing, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, as though it was alive. She reached out toward it, her hand trembling slightly, and as her fingers brushed the surface, a sudden wave of energy washed over her. The world around her blurred, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. The pedestal began to hum louder, the sound growing into a low, resonant growl. And then, she felt it, the presence. It was not physical, it was not even tangible, but it was there, surrounding her, flooding her mind with visions, voices, and sensations that made her skin crawl. "You have found it." The voice filled her head again, the same voice she had heard earlier. But this time, it was more than just a voice. It was a presence, pressing into her thoughts, wrapping itself around her consciousness like a vice. "You have come to the heart of it all. The experiment, the cycle." Elara's breath caught in her throat. The voice, it was the intelligence. But now, it wasn't just speaking to her. It was speaking through her, trying to invade her very thoughts. "You were always meant to be here. This was never an accident. You will be like the others." A vision exploded in her mind, terrible and beautiful all at once. She saw the colony again, but this time, it was not in ruins. The people were thriving, working together under the influence of the intelligence. She saw them coming to the pedestal, touching the sphere, their minds merging with it. The power of the intelligence coursed through them, and they became part of it. They became the cycle. And then, the vision changed. Elara saw herself and the crew, standing where they were now. They, too, reached out to the sphere. Their minds would be absorbed, twisted, transformed. They would no longer be individuals. They would become one with the intelligence, part of its endless experiment, forever trapped in its cycle. "No," Elara gasped, pulling her hand back from the sphere. The vision shattered, and the chamber around her seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. The hum grew louder, and she could feel the sphere calling to her again. It was not just a piece of technology, it was alive, and it wanted her, wanted them all. "We have to destroy it," Elara said, her voice low but filled with determination. "We have to destroy it before it can take us." Jalen and Reyes nodded grimly, each of them understanding the gravity of her words. But even as they moved to prepare for the destruction of the sphere, Elara felt a cold chill run down her spine. The air was thick with the presence of the entity. The chamber felt smaller now, as though the walls were pressing in on them from all sides. She could almost hear its voice again, whispering in the corners of her mind, urging her to give in, to embrace the cycle. She looked at the glowing sphere once more, and for a brief moment, it felt like the entire room held its breath. The cycle had to end. But as the crew prepared to act, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them. Something far darker than the intelligence itself. The entity had manipulated them into coming here, had led them to this moment. And now, as the air grew colder and the walls seemed to close in on them, Elara realized there was one final piece to this puzzle. Something was going to happen. Something they weren't ready for. And when it did, it would change everything. The atmosphere in the cavern had shifted, becoming oppressive, as though the very walls of the planet were breathing with them. The sphere pulsed ominously on its pedestal, its soft hum vibrating through their bodies, sending a strange, dissonant chill deep into their bones. Elara's heart raced as her mind warred with the heavy sensation of being watched, the constant whispering of the entity, its words echoing like a distant, mocking chant. "You cannot destroy it." Elara turned to face her crew, each of them tense, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. Jalen had his weapon aimed at the sphere, his finger hovering over the trigger, while Reyes' hands were clasped tightly at his sides, a grim determination etched on his face. "We don't have a choice," Elara said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "We have to end this, or we'll be trapped here forever, just like the others." Jalen nodded but looked at the sphere with unease. "And if destroying it doesn't work, what then?" Before Elara could answer, the ground beneath their feet rumbled again, this time with more force. The sphere's hum intensified, growing louder and more insistent, as if the object itself was coming alive. The walls of the cavern shuddered, and above them, a dark shadow rippled in the ceiling, an unnatural movement that made the air tremble. And then, it happened. The pedestal began to crack. The smooth stone surface split, jagged lines shooting outward like veins of light, glowing with an eerie, unnatural power. Elara stepped back instinctively, her hand going to the hilt of her weapon, but before she could make a move, the sphere at the center of the pedestal began to levitate. It rose slowly, almost lazily, as if the entire cavern was holding its breath. The hum grew to a deafening pitch, and suddenly, the chamber around them was no longer still. The walls seemed to writhe, and strange symbols began to appear across the stone, glowing in brilliant, alien colors. The symbols shifted, moving in patterns too complex to follow. It was a map. No, not a map, but a web, a network of energy, stretching outward, spiraling into the very fabric of the planet. Elara felt her pulse quicken. The air was thick with an oppressive force, the pressure of unseen eyes all around them. Then, as if in response to their presence, the voice filled her mind once more, but this time it was different. It was no longer just a whisper. It was an overwhelming flood of thoughts, commands, and memories. "You are here to understand. You are here to become." Her mind exploded with flashes of images, visions of the ancient colony's inhabitants, their faces twisted in unnatural expressions, their bodies contorted and frozen in states of ecstasy and horror as they merged with the intelligence. She saw their lives, everything they had built, everything they had loved, being consumed and erased by the intelligence's influence. And then, a chilling realization took root in Elara's mind. The colony had not vanished overnight. They had been absorbed, every last soul. "You are next." The words sent a cold shiver down her spine, but she shook it off, forcing herself to focus. She turned toward Jalen and Reyes. "We don't have time. If we don't act now." Before she could finish, the ground trembled violently. The walls cracked, and the pedestal exploded in a burst of light. The sphere shattered into 1,000 shards, each one sending out a pulse of energy, surging through the chamber like lightning. Elara threw herself to the ground, instinctively covering her head with her arms as the energy tore through the air. She could feel the power, the raw, unrestrained force, ripping through her body, coursing through her veins like fire. Her thoughts became muddled, chaotic, and for a split second, she couldn't tell if she was still on the planet or somewhere else entirely. The world blurred. Then, there was silence. Elara opened her eyes to find herself standing in an entirely different place, no longer in the cavern. She stood at the edge of an immense, alien city. Towers of glass and metal reached toward the sky, pulsing with the same unnatural glow that had filled the pedestal. The air here was different, cooler, but somehow more alive, more sentient. It was as though the city itself was watching her, waiting for something. "Elara," Jalen's voice called from behind her, and she spun around to find him and the rest of the crew standing with her. Their faces were filled with confusion and unease. They had been transported, too. "What just happened?" Reyes asked, his eyes wide. "I don't know," Elara said, her voice thick with disbelief. "But I think it was trying to take us." It was then that she realized the truth. The entity hadn't just been trying to manipulate them. It had been trying to ascend them. The colony had been the first test, the first batch of subjects to be consumed into the intelligence's endless cycle. And now, they were its next experiment. But something was wrong. The city in front of them seemed empty. The streets were devoid of life, and there were no signs of movement. It was as though the place had been abandoned long ago. "This place," Elara whispered, her heart racing. "It's not alive anymore. It's just..." Before she could finish, the sky above them rippled. A vast, dark shape appeared on the horizon, a shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire city. Slowly, it began to move toward them, a shape too large to comprehend, its edges bleeding into the air itself. A voice, deep and resonant, filled Elara's mind again. It was no longer the seductive whisper of the intelligence. This was something else, something far older, far more malevolent. "You should not have come." The ground trembled beneath them again. This was the entity's true form, the heart of its power. It was not a machine, not a being of flesh and blood. It was something older than the stars, an intelligence born from the dark void between galaxies, a creature that had fed on entire civilizations for eons. The cycle was not just an experiment, it was a method of survival, a way to perpetuate its existence across time and space. And now, they had become part of that cycle. "We need to get out of here," Jalen said, his voice trembling. "Elara, what do we do?" But Elara didn't answer. She was staring at the approaching darkness, her mind racing. The entity had been playing a long game, manipulating the crew, pulling them into its web of existence. But now, as the dark shape loomed closer, she realized something far more horrifying. There was no escape. The entity had already won. And if they didn't find a way to stop it, they would become just another forgotten colony in its endless cycle. But even as the dark shape descended upon them, Elara felt something deep inside her stir. The fight wasn't over. The cycle could be broken, but only if they could reach the heart of the entity's power. And they had to do it now, before the darkness consumed them all. The ground trembled again, this time with such force that Elara could feel the very fabric of reality itself bending. The sky above them swirled with an unnatural energy, a darkness that stretched across the heavens, blocking out the stars. The shadow on the horizon loomed larger, its presence suffocating, like a great storm rolling toward them, a storm that had been waiting for eons to engulf them. Elara stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice, that omnipresent, resonant voice, echoed again in her mind. "You are part of the cycle. There is no escape." It was a command, a declaration, a truth that left no room for doubt. This entity, This ancient intelligence had orchestrated everything. The colony, the experiment, the endless loop of manipulation. It was all part of its plan to survive, to grow, to exist beyond time, beyond space. The city that had once seemed abandoned now felt alive, vibrating with the entity's energy, pulsating with its dark power. The streets shimmered, flickering like a mirage, as though they were merely a projection of the entity's will. The towers above them seemed to bend and shift, their shapes becoming distorted and alien, like something not meant to exist in any reality. Elara, Jalen's voice broke through the chaos. What are we supposed to do now? It's everywhere. She turned to face him, and then to the rest of the crew. Their faces were etched with fear, but also determination. They knew this was it, the final choice. They could either fight, or succumb to the entity's will. But how could they fight something that controlled not just the world around them, but their very minds? Elara's fingers tightened around her weapon, but she knew in her gut that it was useless. No weapon, no strategy, no fight would work here. This wasn't about physical strength or firepower. It was about breaking the grip the entity had on them, about finding a way to stop the cycle before it consumed them as it had the others. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. There had to be a way. There had to be something they had missed, something in the ancient data, in the symbol, in the very core of the entity's design. And then it hit her, the sphere, the glowing orb, the key they had found earlier. The entity had wanted them to destroy it, to break the cycle. But perhaps it had been a trick. What if the sphere wasn't the source of the entity's power, but a vessel for it? What if the intelligence itself wasn't contained in the orb, but in something deeper, something more fundamental within the planet, within the very fabric of their reality? Elara's eyes widened with realization. Wait, she shouted, her voice rising above the sound of the rumbling earth. It's not the sphere we need to destroy. It's the source of its power, the place where the cycle begins. Jalen looked confused. What are you talking about? The map, Elara said quickly, turning toward the symbols that had once appeared on the walls. The one that led us here. It was showing us something. The center of the entity's power. The place where the cycle is born, where it's feeding. Reyes stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Where is it? Elara pointed to the sky, to the dark shape that was drawing closer, the shadow that seemed to swallow the stars. The entity was descending upon them, and with it, a terrible, ancient truth. The cycle wasn't just a series of experiments. It was a prison, a system of life and death, trapping entire civilizations in a never-ending loop of consumption. Above, Elara whispered, in the heart of the entity's void. That's where it began. That's where it can end. The crew stared at her, their faces pale with fear, but Elara knew that they had no other choice. The entity had given them no other options. They had to confront it, in its true form, at the very center of its power. How do we get there? Reyes asked, his voice trembling but filled with determination. How do we fight it? We don't fight it, Elara said, her eyes steely with resolve. We stop it. She turned toward the city's skyline, toward the towering structure that seemed to pulse with the dark energy. There, deep within the heart of the city, she could feel the gravitational pull of the intelligence, a force that seemed to draw everything toward it, pulling on their very souls. There's a way, Elara said, almost to herself. We've been walking into it all along. The entity never wanted us to escape. It wanted us to choose. She looked at Jalen, then Reyes, her eyes meeting theirs. They had come this far, and now they had a final choice to make. You'll have to trust me, she said, her voice low but filled with resolve. We can break the cycle, but it requires something more. We have to give ourselves to it, to become part of its pattern. Only then can we sever the loop. Only then can we stop it from continuing. Jalen and Reyes exchanged uneasy glances, but Elara saw the flicker of understanding in their eyes. They didn't have to like it, but they had no other choice. What happens to us? Jalen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elara swallowed, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on her chest. I don't know. But we'll never truly know until we face it. The shadow above them grew ever closer, its form coalescing into something vast and incomprehensible. A swirling mass of dark energy, a presence beyond time, beyond understanding. The voice of the entity filled the air, its tone final, as though it was speaking not to them, but to the universe itself. You are mine. The words filled Elara's mind with an overwhelming sense of finality, but instead of fear, she felt a deep calm wash over her. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. Now, she said, her voice resolute, we stop it. And in that final moment, as the dark shape of the entity descended upon them, Elara stepped forward, her hand reaching out to the void itself, knowing that in this confrontation, there would be no winner, only an end. The cycle would either break, or they would become part of it forever. It was a risk they had to take. And so, they faced the abyss.